Shut up! We are not gonna die! Aphelion, engage gravimetric stabilizers!
Negative. Stabilizers offline. Thrusters offline. Landing flaps offline.
Alright, so we're gonna die.
They say when a video game franchise goes on for a long time, the quality starts to dip and never return to being the good that it used to be. Thankfully, that's not a problem here. Ratchet & Clank: A Crack in Time is the 7th game released out of the main series and was essentially going to be the end of the Future Saga storyline. We finally get answers to what's happened to Clank and more answers about his and Ratchet's past. But how good is this game going back to it today? Well, we're going to find out as I'm Ace, and this is the Ratchet & Clank: A Crack in Time review. So, strap up your boots and get ready for another adventure. Let's begin. Now, I'm going to give a more condensed version of events here. The story picks up right after the events of Quest for Booty, where Dr. Nefarious is still trying to work on Clank. It turns out Clank has information in his head that can lead to something called the Orifice Chamber, which Nefarious has been looking for. But the Zoni aren't going to let Nefarious get access to it, as only Clank is allowed to gain access to it. So, deciding to dissolve their partnership, he sends the Zoni off by launching his
Hypersonic Brainwave Scrambler!
In doing so, he shuts off the power as well as awakens Clank, allowing him to escape. But unfortunately, our hero doesn't get far. But instead of locking him back up, Nefarious leaves him to his own devices to explore
The Great Clock! A marvel of science and sorcery, engineered by the brightest Sony in all of existence, and constructed in the exact center of the universe! Give or take 50 feet.
So, while this is going on, Ratchet is still exploring the far reaches of the Polaris Galaxy with Quark to find out where Clank is. And in his adventures, he not only meets the Fongoids and learn about their connection to the Zoni, but they also end up encountering another Lombax, Alistair Azimuth. Turns out, Azimuth is the one who gave the other Lombaxes the idea to let Emperor Tachyon, the Lombax's technology all those years ago, allowing him to essentially get his revenge for them wiping out the Cragmites all those years ago. So, as punishment for his terrible crimes and letting Tachyon essentially use their technology to almost wipe them out, Azimuth was essentially banned from joining his people. So, he's been looking for a device called the Great Clock as well, which is where Clank is now. In his mind, the Great Clock will allow them to time travel back to before the Lombaxes were wiped out by Tachyon and forced to move to a different galaxy. In doing so, he can make it so this never happened and that the Lombaxes would still be here, allowing Ratchet to be with his family. Although, kind of when you think about it, if he does change history like this, Ratchet will have never met Clank in the first place, and all the good that they've done in the universe may be undone. But that's not really the problem. Meanwhile, while Ratchet and Azimuth are working together to find Clank, Clank is busy learning about the Great Clock and the responsibilities that his father, the creator of the Great Clock, Orifice, had, and his destiny to eventually take his father's place as the Great Caretaker. As it's revealed, the Fongoids were a race that the Zoni allowed access to time travel long ago, and they it up and almost caused the entire universe to collapse. So, Clank's father, Orifice, created the Great Clock as a way to stabilize time itself and to prevent things from going off hand. So, long story short, the Great Clock isn't meant to be a time machine, and trying to use it that way would end up causing catastrophic damage to the space-time continuum, or even the multiverse or universe, whichever one you want to think about it. So, eventually, our heroes are able to meet up once again after many trials and Valkyrie battles, and have one last showdown with Dr. Nefarious in his space station before he heads to the Great Clock. And once again, Nefarious questions Clank's motivations and ideas because he's finally reached where he's supposed to be in his destiny, and yet for him to still choose to be a sidekick to Ratchet just doesn't make any sense to him. But in Ratchet's eyes, he never saw Clank as a sidekick. They've always been friends, and no matter what Clank decides to do, he will still accept the choice that he's made. So together, our two heroes defeat Nefarious and destroy his fleet, saving the universe. But this is going to be their goodbye. Clank has to stay at the Great Clock to make sure it's protected, that it's safe. This is what he was meant to do. Of course, upon learning about them not planning to use the Great Clock to save the Lombaxes, of course Azimuth isn't happy, but Ratchet tells him that they'll find another way. But the past needs to stay where it is, and he goes to walk off Clank one last time. But Azimuth doesn't take this no too well.
Where are you going? This is your responsibility. You can't just walk away. The Lombaxes need us. Don't walk away from me! I said stop!
And he lashes out, killing Ratchet immediately. Something that essentially most every other villain in this franchise has never been able to do. Of course, Clank isn't going to take this lightly as he rushes to the Great Clock and locks it down to prevent Azimuth from gaining access. But not wanting to let his friend go, despite risking the time-space continuum, as he's been alerted to, he remembers the sage advice of one favorite plumber in his head, and so he decides to use the Great Clock to time travel back at least 6 minutes, not causing too much damage to the time stream, to save Ratchet, and it leads to one final battle with Azimuth as Azimuth breaks into the Great Clock and activates the time travel device. Of course, rupturing the space-time continuum, which we've been trying to avoid. Even with him being defeated, he's still in disbelief that this was going to happen. Again, Ratchet has to clarify, the Great Clock was never meant to alter time. Only keep it running at its normal pace. Realizes the damage he's caused and the fact that he can't undo his own mistakes. He decides to set things right he decides to sacrifice himself to stop the Great Clock from moving any further back in time, which, while he succeeds, it ends up costing him his own life. So after getting everything back under control, Ratchet prepares to leave the Great Clock to go off on his own, and Clank just prepares to stay behind and take care of the Great Clock. But before he decides to, he realizes he can't leave Ratchet out there alone in the universe, at least until he can help him find his own people. So he leaves the Great Clock in the caretaking of Sid. Sid was essentially Orvis's assistant, so in Clank's eyes, he's left in the person who is best fitted for the job, and runs off to chase after Ratchet. After which, Sid replays Orvis's message that Orvis left behind, and at the very end of the message, it reveals that honestly, Orvis didn't care if Clank took over his position at the Great Clock or not. In his mind, he's just a father who wanted his son to chase after the thing he wanted to do. And just like that, our two heroes fly off whatever. At the end of the day, whether Clank took over the Great Clock or not, Orvis was just fine with his son choosing to do whatever they wanted to do. So our heroes fly off to their next adventure. As for Quark, well, Quark seems to have been trapped on an asteroid with a monster he met in, of course, another arena. Quite a way to end the story. Honestly, this story made me really sad. because the entire time I was under this impression that this was the end of the dynamic duo, that they wouldn't be friends anymore, or they would just never see each other again. And sure, by the end, our heroes decide to go off on another adventure. I was still under the impression that this was going to be the last game in the franchise. So with that mindset in mind, this game's finale really left a great impression on me. But story alone isn't enough. Let's see how it moves over to gameplay. Now we've moved on from the story, let's talk about one of my favorite parts of this, the gameplay. Honestly, I feel like this is a more fluid version of Tools of Destruction, as, at least with this game, the weapons actually do better damage in this, which is great. For starters, the formula is still about the same. You explore our lovely Ratchet and Clank at 1.0. Explore planets, do the collectathons, fight enemies, and move on to the next. Now, the main thing is that gameplay is switched into mainly two essential parts. The first part is that Ratchet is doing most of the planet exploring, as Clank isn't with him, at least until like the last third of the game. So he's on his own, blasting things apart. He's also been given a new tool, an upgraded form of the hover boots, essentially, which allow at least for more maneuverability and speed. This makes getting around planets a lot easier, and makes up for the fact that Clank really isn't around to help at least with his helipack or jetpack functions. Meanwhile, Clank is essentially doing his own little quest of platforming and puzzle solving in the Great Clock, as you'll be either doing dream sequences to learn new powers, or you'll be doing puzzles freeing planets from time anomalies, or time puzzles where you'll create clones of yourself from time to solve problems, which honestly is pretty cool. I'll give it that. And yes, even if you do find a puzzle maybe a bit too hard or something, fret not, as the game also has an option that you can pick to essentially bypass doing the puzzle entirely. So if you'd rather just continue the adventure and not have to worry about puzzles, that option is also available to you, which is cool. You've also got, of course, your obligatory tournaments and battle arena. It's returned, which is like awesome. You've got plenty of different modes in the tournament to do, as well as a lovely little arcade game, My Blaster Runs Hot, where you essentially play as Captain Quark in a little top-down view where you just basically shoot enemies and prevent them from getting to him. If he gets touched, he dies. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you, getting the trophy related to this was a chore and a half, but if you're just kind of playing for fun, it's a nice little distraction from here and there. And speaking of distractions, you've got Space Combat. Space Combat has returned. Now, it may not be the same sort of combat as, let's just say, what the Going Commando had, but I like that Space Combat has returned again. This time around, there's probably several little missions out in space that you can do by interacting with NPCs, which, honestly, I like that there's more here to do than just your simple point and shoot. So the fact that we have some more space-themed things to do is great, because I love being in space. You also have several planets scattered in each sector of the universe that you're in. Each of these planets has their own little challenge or enemies to fight, and by doing these challenges, you'll gain rewards like upgrades for certain weapons, titanium or platinum bolts, and hell, the Zoni. The Zoni are a key point in this whole storyline, but besides story purposes, they can also do some upgrades for you as well. By getting certain amounts of Zoni, you can unlock new weapons and upgrades for your ship, which will make space combat even easier for you, which I think is fun. Also, if you happen to collect all the lovely Zonies that are scattered around the universe, you'll be able to go challenge Lord Vorsalon, one of Nefarious's henchmen. And honestly, the fight's kind of a joke. But to be fair, Vorsalon, in my eyes, more just like a joke sort of villain. So it's a nice little gag for somebody for you to do after the story has been completed to give you some fun. The weapons this time are pretty solid. Like I said, they do much more damage than they did in Tools of Destruction, and they're a bit more unique in design, which, hey, love that. And something that really takes the cake for me is the fact that every time you buy a new weapon or you look at the weapon, they have a nice little cutscene that basically gives like a little in-depth look of Ratchet using it on his enemies. It's sort of like a cartoony style. That's the kind of stuff that I love. So seeing all the individual little cutscenes related to each and every weapon is fantastic. And hey, remember how you had your wrench, which could detach itself to help you solve puzzles and stuff through Quest for Booty? It's still here, and you have even more puzzles and stuff to solve with it. So I'm glad we get to actually use it to its full purpose now. If there's any weapons that I'd love to be able to highlight this time around, of course, you've got the Rift Inducer. Now, I'm sure most of you remember the Rift Inducer from Up Your Arsenal. Well, this is essentially just a better version of that. And being able to open a wormhole with a giant monster to just attack and eat your enemies is hilarious. And it works so well. Now, sure, you, of course, can't use this on bosses to the same extent of regular enemies, but that's fine. Then, of course, you've got the Sonic Eruptor, which is literally just an alien belching machine. Like, that is just hilarious. And the better you are at timing your attacks, you can unleash an even greater belch attack, which, honestly, when I first saw this, I laughed my ass off. This was just great to me, so I honestly love using it. It's a fan favorite. And of course, you've got the best weapon, the Rhino. Now, thankfully, just like with the Rhino in Tools of Destruction, all you really need to do is find the hollow plans for it, and bam, you've got yourself the best weapon in the game. With a max capacity of 3,000 bullets, if it wants to. This weapon will rip to shreds anything and everything. So, literally, you could get this weapon before you face Dr. Nefarious and Azimuth and destroy them both. And honestly, I love the fact that you don't have to go to New Game Plus just to get this. Which means you get to test this out in the base game, which most times you don't really get the chance to. So, having something like this on hand and essentially for free, what's more to love? Now, going into characters, we got some things to talk about. Like, for the most part, our dynamic duo is still probably as best as they are, but they have more important conflicts to think about this time around. After all, Clank has finally learned about his origins and his purpose in the universe. Maintaining and keeping the Great Clock safe from those who would abuse its power. And Ratchet has finally found another Lombax, besides Angel Cross, and learned about his history and the fact that there could be a way for him to get his people back. But the problem is, if they use the Great Clock for this purpose, the person he is now may not even exist. He may not even see his best friend again. Or hey, even if he decides not to use it and they defeat Dr. Nefarious, Clank is going to have to stay behind to keep the clock safe and not go along with journeys with Ratchet anymore. I mean, this is the kind of thing that tugs at them both, because they've been friends and been on adventures for many years now, and just the idea of them having to eventually go their separate ways really hurts. Because, sure, at least Clank has some greater destiny and at least the Zoni and Sigmund to stand by him, Ratchet, especially after, Asmith dies, Ratchet is still essentially alone. He'd still have no one left. And, or even if he did get the Lombax back, he'd lose his best friend in all of this. It just kind of goes to make you question, like, is it really worth risking everything just to get the one thing you've always wanted? character Asmith's story makes me sad because he's kind of broken. I mean, you do learn that he's the cause of the Lombaxes being essentially almost wiped out because he convinced the council to let Tachyon have their technology in the first place. But he realizes what he's done and the consequences of it. But the fact that he's just been left behind, abandoned, exiled, makes you feel bad because he knows what he did is wrong. He got his greatest friend, Ratchet's dad, killed, and he wants to make amends. And he will go to whatever great lengths need be done to make it happen. Like, the fact that he's willing to even risk the entire time-space continuum just to even have a chance to do the right thing is crazy. But at some point, you also have to understand, like, what would you do if you were in this situation? Could you really say without a shadow, if there was a way to not just fix like a simple mistake, like, oh, I stole something, if there was a way to undo a great tragedy, would you really pass up the opportunity despite the risks involved? I wonder how many could actually say that. And then, of course, there's Sigmund and Orvis. I would go into Dr. Nefarious, but Dr. Nefarious is still the same wacky, fun villain from before, so there's not really much I can really touch up upon that I haven't already said in the other videos at this point. Orvis is Clank's father, the creator of the Great Clock. And for the short time he's in, I love that you can see a lot of Clank's personality within him. But at times you also get to understand how serious of a person Orvis was. He gifted the Fongoids the gift of time travel, and upon seeing them almost, destroy everything by abusing it, he had to make sure that no one else would make the same mistake again, and did his very best to do so. Hell, he even sacrificed himself to make sure Dr. Nefarious would never get his on the secrets that will lead him to the Great Clock itself. Now, unfortunately, Nefarious would end up finding out anyway, but that's not the point. But what I really love is the fact that in his last video message, you see that despite how important protecting the Great Clock is and how this may be Clank's destiny, at the end of the day, what he really wants is his son to be able to choose whatever path that he wants to walk down. So, despite all this, you at least can tell that he truly cares about Clank. After all, he has been keeping an eye on him for all this time. He hasn't just been like an absentee dad. He has at least been keeping an eye on his adventures and all that he's accomplished. And he's proud. Sigmund was Orvis' assistant. He's always been by his side, keeping the Great Clock safe. And it's great to see this friendship building between him and Clank, but you also get to see a bit of sadness because Orvis was his friend. And he knew that going to meet Nefarious on Xanathar just seemed like a dangerous plan, but he couldn't convince him not to go. And that thought of maybe if he had stopped him, Orvis would still be here lingers. He's also very nervous and full of anxiety at times. But I love the fact that Clank was willing to trust him with the care of the Great Clock because he knew that Sigmund was ready for this responsibility, and I'm sure Orvis would have thought the same, as who else could be. Now, an interesting tidbit I will touch on with this one is the fact that Angela Cross is talked about in this game, and apparently she's missing. No one really knows what happened to her after going commando. No one really knows what happened to her after going commando, which was several games ago. And I just question, what did they do to her? Like, is she kidnapped? Will we see her again? No one knows because she hasn't been talked about or even touched upon. Not even in Rift Apart either. So I just begin to question, what did they do with our female Lombax friend? And will we ever see her again? Thing is, no one knows. It's just a mystery. Usually with these videos, again, we talk about the good and the bad. Again, if I had to say bad, it's, as I said previously, we have no idea what happened to Angela Cross. She's just kind of ridden out of the franchise and just left hanging. With Alistair Asmus, I would have liked if they had, I don't know, made him his reveal to being a bit more villainy just to make sure that he rescued the Lombaxes at all costs and getting rid of anyone and everyone in his way. I think this would have been cooler if this had happened probably at the midway point of the game, where him just ousting Nefarious from this scenario, similar to how Nefarious did with Drek in the remake of 1. I think that would have been cool, and then eventually we see him building up to realizing what he's done is wrong, as opposed to literally at the end of the game, he does bad, then he makes things right. I feel like if they had changed that, that would have been a bit better wise, but unfortunately we just didn't have that opportunity. And the final thing I'd like to think about would have to be the armor sets, because again, armor doesn't look as cool or rather unique as it did in the games that came before, as it feels like it's just a color palette swap, honestly. And I feel like there could have just been more done here to make it look a little bit more unique, so to speak. Honestly, Ratchet & Clank: A Crack in Time was such a fun adventure, and for the longest time, I would have assumed that this would be where the franchise had finally ended. Our heroes finally just taking off into the stratosphere. Our heroes finally taking off and just never seeing them again. If this is where this franchise would have ended off on the PS3 era, it would have been sad, but I would have accepted that I got to watch this amazing journey from all the way back in the first game to now and just go, hey, it's been a great ride. Ups and downs, rhinos and whack jobs. Ratchet & Clank: A Crack in Time is a highlight of a game, and it's something hopefully everyone gets to try at one point or another. Now, some of you sure may not have PS3, but hey, if I remember, it should be available through the PS5's Essential or Premium Edition, so if you see it there, hey, go check it out sometime. Or, who knows, maybe they'll add it to the PS5 store and you can just buy it outright, which would be pretty cool. However, this wouldn't be the end of the franchise, as we'd be introduced to Ratchet & Clank into the Nexus not too far off, but that is a video for another day. So, what do you guys think? Did you enjoy Ratchet & Clank: A Crack in Time, or are there some things that you think should have been done better? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you have to say on it. If you have any suggestions of games you'd like to see me talk about once the Ratchet series is done, or if you'd like to hear some thoughts on the things I love and hate for certain video games, there are playlists available. And as always, you can check us out live Monday through Wednesday during the week, just playing a variety of games. So until next time, I've been Ace. You guys have been great. I'll see you later. Take care. And always remember,
you're just a lonely man, Lance, boarding a lonely train on its way to Lonely Town.
So help me, it's true. All aboard for Lonely Town. Choo-choo, Janice. Choo-choo.